Moving on to discussion, the superintendent's proposed FY20 operating budget. Dr. Lockard.
Thank you, board members. Our annual budget process requires that I submit a recommended FY20 operating budget to you at this meeting. The budget I'm recommending to you will be then available for public comment until your February meeting, at which time you'll adopt the requested budget for us to submit to the commissioners. I'll cut right to it, and then we'll ask Mr. Hartlove to give us some of the specifics. The proposed budget that I present to you today asks for a local increase of 4.65%. That's equivalent to $8.9 million over last year's request. I want to make sure that I take a little bit of time to explain the process and rationale behind that request and some of the thinking. In creating this recommended budget, I've tried to consider and balance the requirements of my role as superintendent, the priorities and needs of our students, the interests of our employees, and some historical perspective, and a realistic view of potential revenue. So to achieve this balance, I've tried to, one, provide for reasonable but competitive employee salaries, and those are subject, of course, to your collective bargaining with our employee groups, and two, to provide consideration of systemic needs that allow us to address the highest priorities for students, which have been identified through our strategic plan process, discussed at our December work session, and vetted there. As was stated at the work session, we fully realize that consideration for even one of those positions is revenue dependent. Other than these two critical components, my recommendation includes no other increases or improvements for the system. The recommendation I am making addresses these two highest priorities and also meets anticipated inflation. Lastly, for the first time in many, many years, this recommended budget does not include any reductions in teaching positions. The challenging fiscal years of the past decade have had a significant impact on our employees' compensation, particularly when comparing us with other Maryland school systems with whom we compete. In FY09, we ranked 9th in the state for average salary, which is consistent with our relative wealth ranking. In FY15, we ranked 23rd, which was next to last. In FY18, most recently, our average teacher salary ranking moved back up to 17th in Maryland. This improvement incorporates 2 of the last 3 years of steps and COLAs. It's important to me that we find a way to continue the progress made during the last couple of years in terms of employee compensation. While I can't discuss the specifics of salary that are subject to ongoing collective bargaining, the recommended budget includes an allocation to allow us to bargain a salary improvement for our employees. It's also important to note that since 2008, a full decade, we have not added a single position to the budget for improvements. During this time, we have made significant reductions to our organization to offset inflation and declining state revenue based on our enrollment. We've worked to fund a balanced budget each year based on available local revenue. We have cut, adjusted, innovated, and done more with less to try and continue to meet the needs of our students. However, the needs of our students and the programs we need to offer them have not remained static. It's now time for us to start addressing those needs. We realize that this needs to be done in a reasonable and appropriate manner. At the December work session, we discussed some prioritized needs for our students. These items were linked to our strategic plan and represent the critical and growing needs of our students. They don't represent all of the needs that have been identified across our system, but rather a final list derived from a much larger process of consideration. And I consider these to be true needs. This recommended budget includes the consideration of funds that will allow us to begin to address these true needs, dependent, again, on final revenue figures and our negotiated agreements. As stated earlier, I completely understand that we may not be able to address all things at once in 1 year. But by discussing and articulating our needs with the list of highest prioritized needs already known, this allows us to begin the important work once the final revenue picture is clarified and we can further chip away at it in the coming years. As noted, these past 10 years have been very challenging. There's a long and unfortunately impressive list of cost-saving reductions that the Board of Education has made to offset inflation and deal with losses in state revenue. That entire list of recommendations, efficiencies, and innovations is still available on our website if anybody wants to look at it. While those years were far from easy, the board made tough but prudent choices that better position us now that the fiscal picture isn't quite as bleak. For example, the board resisted the urge to use fund balance and other one-time revenues for ongoing operational costs. This would have made choices in a single year a little easier, but created an even deeper funding gap in subsequent years. The board and the school system did an effective job of meeting great challenges and maintaining a highly effective school system. This is a remarkable testament to the board, to the leadership, and to our very dedicated and committed employees. Although we're asking for an increase of 4.65% in local funding, in the context of our entire budget, this represents a 2.75 increase to our operating costs. Mr. Hartlove will be explaining that in just a minute. My primary role as superintendent is to take the initiative in constructing a recommended budget that meets the needs of our schools, employees, and most importantly, our students. Hopefully, the background I've provided here explains a little bit about the rationale, and with that in mind, I'll now turn to Mr. Hartlove to share the logistics of the recommended FY20 budget.